The neck is a very complex region, with many structures existing within and passing through it. For this reason, anatomists like to divide the anatomy of the neck into distinct regions, which makes identifying structures more easy. This compartmentalization is also useful during surgery when trying to recognize structures under suboptimal circumstances. The largest subdivision of the neck is the anterior triangle. This is a region bounded superiorly by the inferior border of the mandible, laterally by the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and medially by an imaginary line drawn down the middle of the neck. The anterior triangle is sometimes easier to explore from a slight lateral view, as we see here. As the anterior triangle is so large and contains so many structures, it is further subdivided into 4 smaller triangles. I'm going to do a dedicated video on each of these triangles, but for now let's just remember their names. They are the carotid triangle, submandibular triangle, submental triangle, and muscular triangle. It's important to remember that all these triangles are paired and exist on both the left and right side of the neck. There are 8 muscles that sit within the anterior triangle of the neck. 4 of these lie above the hyoid bone, and are thus known as suprahyoid muscles. And 4 of these lie below the hyoid bone and are known as infrahyoid muscles. Starting with the infrahyoid muscles, we have the sternothyroid, which goes from the sternum to the lower part of the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. The thyrohyoid muscle, which spans between the thyroid cartilage and the hyoid bone. The sternohyoid muscle, which goes all the way from the sternum to connect to the hyoid bone. And lastly, the omohyoid muscle, which goes from the lower part of the hyoid bone all the way to the superior border of the scapula. This muscle is usually split into 2 bellies, one superior and one inferior, with an intermediate tendon joining them. The intermediate tendon is anchored within the deep cervical fascia of the neck. The omohyoid muscle gets its name from the Greek origin omos, meaning shoulder. All of the infrahyoid muscles are innervated by branches of the ansa cervicalis neural loop, except for the thyrohyoid, which is innervated by a C1 branch accompanying the hypoglossal nerve. The infrahyoid muscles are commonly remembered using the acronym TOS, where each letter represents one of the muscles mentioned. And then we have the suprahyoid muscles, which sit above the hyoid bone. It's a little bit easier to see these muscles if we look at them from an inferior view at the underside of the mandible. First we have the geniohyoid muscle, which goes from the posterior aspect of the mandible to the body of the hyoid bone. Then we have the mylohyoid muscle, which overlies the geniohyoid muscles and also connects the posterior mandible to the body of the hyoid bone. We then have the digastric muscle, which, like the omohyoid muscle, is usually split into 2 bellies connected by an intermediate tendon. This tendon is anchored directly to the anterior part of the hyoid bone. The digastric muscle goes from the inferior anterior mandible all the way to the mastoid process of the temporal bone. Its name comes from Latin origins and literally means 2 bellies. Lastly, we have the stylohyoid muscle, which starts from the styloid process of the temporal bone and splits to insert into the hyoid bone either side of the digastric tendon. All of these muscles are paired left and right except for mylohyoid, which spans across the midline. The nerve supply of the suprahyoid muscles is a little more complex, with the geniohyoid being innervated by C1 via the hypoglossal nerve, mylohyoid and the anterior belly of digastric being innervated by the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve, and stylohyoid and the posterior belly of the digastric being innervated by the facial nerve. You can remember the suprahyoid muscles using the mnemonic, "My grandma sews dresses," with the first letter of each word corresponding to a different muscle. There are a number of other important structures found within the anterior triangle of the neck. A lot of these we'll discuss in detail when we delve into the 4 subdivisions, but the important ones to recognise for now are the common carotid arteries, which run up either side of the neck and bifurcate into the internal and external carotid arteries within the anterior triangle, the internal jugular vein and its major tributaries, the facial and superior thyroid veins, and the anterior jugular vein, which runs over the front of the neck. There are also important nerves in the anterior triangle, in particular the facial, glossopharyngeal, vagus, spinal accessory, and hypoglossal cranial nerves. There are also numerous lymph nodes and several salivary glands which are related to the various subdivisions of the anterior triangle. Okay, that's enough detail on the anterior triangle of the neck for now. In the next few videos, I'm going to go through the 4 subdivisions in much more detail and discuss the various structures related to them. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. In the meantime, I hope you learned something and have a great day.